2 hours ago, the Government of Canada published a document that no government has ever released about a bilateral relationship in the modern era. Not a diplomatic protest, not a legal filing, not a counter-tariff schedule. A 214-page quantitative analysis, prepared by Statistics Canada, the Bank of Canada, and 14 independent research institutions, titled The Architecture of American Dependency, a sector-by-sector assessment of United States reliance on Canadian supply, infrastructure, and services. The report does not argue. It does not editorialize. It measures every sector, every dependency, every number sourced, footnoted, and independently verified. Energy, food, water, minerals, defense, digital infrastructure, health services, education, financial systems, lumber, steel, aluminum, transportation corridors, each one quantified with a single additional calculation that no previous document has ever assembled in one place. The cost to the United States of replacing Canadian supply in each sector and the timeline required to do so. That timeline column is the one that stopped every analyst who opened the document cold. Mark Carney released it himself. Not through a minister, not through a press secretary. He stood at a podium in Ottawa with a printed copy on the desk in front of him, opened to page 4, the executive summary, and read the first paragraph aloud. The United States cannot replace Canadian energy supply in under 3 years. It cannot replace Canadian mineral inputs to its defense industrial base in under 5 years. It cannot replace Canadian freshwater access governance in under a generation. It cannot replace Canadian healthcare workers in its border state hospital systems in under a decade. These are not political positions. These are engineering timelines based on physical infrastructure constraints, workforce training requirements, and geological reality. We are releasing this document because 18 months of public debate has proceeded without these numbers. The numbers are now public. He put the report down and walked off the podium without taking questions. The document was already downloading on every financial terminal, every government network, and every newsroom server on Earth. The report is organized into 9 sectors. Each sector follows the same structure: current Canadian supply volume, American domestic production capacity, the gap between them, the estimated replacement cost, and the replacement timeline. The methodology is transparent. The data is public source. The conclusions are the product of arithmetic. The energy section runs 41 pages. The headline figure is already circulating across financial media. The United States receives 3.8 million barrels of Canadian crude oil daily. American domestic production can theoretically cover this volume, but only if Gulf Coast refineries are reconfigured for lighter domestic crude at a capital cost. The report estimates at $340 billion and a construction timeline of 4 to 7 years, during which refinery output falls by approximately 30%. The natural gas figures are starker. 6 northeastern American states receive more than 40% of their winter heating gas from Canadian sources. The pipeline infrastructure to replace that supply from domestic American sources does not exist. The report estimates construction at $180 billion and 8 years minimum. The minerals section is the one that the Pentagon had flagged internally as the most sensitive. The report documents American defense industrial base dependence on Canadian cobalt, lithium, nickel, uranium, and rare earth processing at precise volume figures that have never appeared in a single public document before. The summary table shows that 23 weapon systems currently in American active inventory depend on Canadian mineral inputs at some stage of their supply chain. The replacement timeline for establishing non-Canadian sources at equivalent volume and processing quality, a minimum of 6 years for the most accessible alternatives, with 3 specific categories: high-grade uranium conversion, battery-grade cobalt, and specific rare earth oxides, for which no viable non-Canadian alternative at American required volumes currently exists anywhere on Earth. That sentence, "no viable alternative currently exists anywhere on Earth," appears 3 times in the minerals section. Each time it appears, it is accompanied by a footnote citing the specific American weapons program that depends on the material in question. But this is where the report becomes something beyond a bilateral trade document. The healthcare section quantifies something that American hospital administrators have known for years, but that has never appeared in official government data. Canadian-trained physicians, nurses, and allied health professionals currently fill staffing positions at hospitals in 22 American states. The report counts them 67,000 Canadian-trained healthcare workers currently employed in the American health system. The replacement timeline, training American-born replacements to equivalent qualification levels through American medical and nursing programs, is a minimum of 7 years for physicians and 4 years for registered nurses. The immediate gap: 340 American hospitals in border states currently operate below safe staffing ratios without their Canadian employees. The report names them by state. It names the counties. It names the specialties where the gaps are most acute. The water governance section is the shortest and the most stark. 11 pages. It does not calculate a replacement cost. It calculates something different: the replacement timeline for establishing equivalent freshwater access governance frameworks if Canadian cooperation under the 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty were suspended. The answer, which the report presents without commentary, is that no such replacement timeline is calculable because freshwater access governance for the Great Lakes system cannot function without Canadian participation. The section ends with a single sentence: there is no unilateral American solution to this dependency. The financial section documents something that Wall Street had been modeling privately for months, but had not seen assembled in public form. Canadian pension funds, sovereign investment vehicles, and Crown Corporation holdings represent a significant ownership stake in American infrastructure. The report calculates it: $847 billion in Canadian institutional capital is currently deployed in American roads, bridges, airports, water treatment facilities, and energy transmission infrastructure. This is not investment in American financial markets. This is ownership of the physical infrastructure Americans use every day. The replacement capital, finding alternative investors willing to hold these assets at equivalent terms, would take a minimum of 3 to 5 years under favorable market conditions and would require a yield premium the report estimates at 180 basis points above current terms, adding approximately $15 billion annually to American infrastructure financing costs. The digital infrastructure section updates what previous analyses had established: approximately 30% of American transatlantic internet traffic routes through Canadian fiber. The lumber section documents that Canadian softwood lumber accounts for approximately 27% of American residential construction materials, and that American domestic forestry cannot scale to replace that volume in under a decade without clear-cutting protected forest at a political cost no administration has been willing to pay. The aluminum section shows that Canadian primary aluminum production supplies inputs to American aerospace manufacturing that cannot be replaced from domestic sources because American primary aluminum production capacity has declined by 65% over the past 20 years. The report closes with a section titled "The Replacement Cost Summary." It presents a single table: 8 sectors. For each sector, the estimated capital cost of replacing Canadian supply from alternative sources, and the minimum timeline. The totals at the bottom of the table are what financial media has been quoting since the document went live. Total estimated capital cost to replace Canadian supply across all 8 sectors: $2.3 trillion. Minimum timeline for full replacement across all sectors simultaneously: 11 years, assuming no construction delays, no regulatory obstacles, no workforce constraints, and immediate availability of all required financing. The report notes, in the final paragraph, that none of those assumptions are realistic, and that a more conservative estimate would extend the timeline to 16 to 20 years and increase the capital cost by a factor of 1.4 to 1.8. The market reaction was not a crash. It was a repricing: precise, immediate, and durable. American energy utilities repriced on the refinery reconfiguration timeline. Defense contractors repriced on the mineral dependency table. Healthcare REITs repriced on the hospital staffing figures. Infrastructure funds repriced on the Canadian institutional capital withdrawal scenario. The movements were not dramatic in percentage terms. They were dramatic in their simultaneity. 8 sectors repricing in the same direction within 90 minutes of a single document going public. Goldman Sachs published a client note within 2 hours describing the report as the most comprehensive single-source documentation of bilateral economic integration ever assembled, and the most significant input to American supply chain risk modeling since the COVID-19 pandemic revealed global dependency vulnerabilities. The political reaction in Washington was unlike any previous response in this confrontation because the report did not give politicians anything to argue with. It gave them numbers. Specific, sourced, independently verified numbers. And numbers do not respond to counter-messaging. The Senate Finance Committee chair requested an immediate classified briefing from the Congressional Budget Office on the report's methodology. 3 Republican senators from energy states entered the document into the Senate record within hours of its release, not to critique it, but to ensure it was formally preserved in the Congressional Archive. The House Armed Services Committee announced hearings specifically focused on the minerals dependency findings. The chairman described the 3 "no viable alternative exists anywhere on Earth" footnotes as the most alarming supply chain disclosure I have seen in 12 years on this committee. The international response was the one that Carney had designed the report to produce. The document was released simultaneously in English, French, German, Japanese, and Korean. It was transmitted directly to the finance ministries and trade departments of 41 nations before it was transmitted to American media. Every government that had been watching this confrontation from a distance and drawing its own private conclusions now had a public, quantified, independently verified foundation for those conclusions. The European Commission described the report as a landmark contribution to the global understanding of North American economic integration. Japan's Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry requested a formal briefing from Canadian trade officials. Germany's economics minister cited the mineral dependency section in a speech about European supply chain resilience the same afternoon. Trump has 3 paths, and for the first time in this confrontation, none of them involve a counter-move against Canada. The report has no directive to rescind. It has no filing to contest. It has no mechanism to block. It is a public document containing public data assembled by credentialed institutions using transparent methodology. The only response available to Washington is to dispute the numbers. And the numbers are sourced from American government data, American industry reports, and American academic research. Disputing them means disputing Washington's own prior publications. 2 hours ago, 18 months of public confrontation had proceeded on the assumption that the terms of American dependency on Canada were understood well enough to price into the political calculus on both sides. 2 hours later, the terms are public, specific, and attached to dollar figures and year counts that anyone can read. Carney did not release this document to win an argument. Arguments can be countered. He released it to end one category of argument permanently. The argument about whether the dependency is real, how large it is, and how long it would take to replace. The numbers are now public. They were always true. Now everyone knows they were always true. And the column that stops every analyst cold is still the timeline column. Not the cost. The time. 11 years minimum. 16 to 20 years realistically. For a country whose political cycle runs on 4-year intervals, that column does not describe a negotiating position. It describes a structural reality that outlasts every administration that will ever read it. Washington has been treating this relationship as a choice. The report establishes in 214 pages of sourced arithmetic that it is not.